After that beautiful, beautiful music and relaxing meditation, it says here, my job is to inspire you, so wake up. Excuse me for a second. I'm so happy to be here with you today. Ron and Gary and I probably passed each other because Ron is down in Sierra Vista. So I bring you greetings from the Sky Island Unitarian Universalist congregation there. And I want to thank you for welcoming me into your pulpit for what Ron calls the Pulpit Palooza. I was happy to meet several of your members. I guess it was a little over a week ago for our Baja 4 board workshop, including Conrad. And I really look forward to the ways that our southeastern Arizona congregations can work to support one another and make Unitarian Universalism even stronger in this part of the state. Today I'm going to share with you some reflections on this year's Common Read, a book entitled Just Mercy, a story of justice and redemption by Bryan Stevenson. How many of you are aware that the Unitarian Universalist Association chooses a book each year and develops a discussion guide that encourages UUs across the land to learn about an issue together? How many of you? Some of you know that. Great. Have any of you read Just Mercy yet? Okay. This is the 6th year of the Common Read program. It began with the death of Jocelyn in 2010, a book which highlighted many of the issues related to the plight of undocumented immigrants in this country. The 2011 Common Read, called Acts of Faith, encouraged us to promote an understanding and acceptance of pluralism by engaging in interfaith dialogue. The new Jim Crow in 2012 reminded us that discrimination, segregation, and oppression of African Americans are all alive and well in this country despite our laws to the contrary. In 2013, Behind the Kitchen Door taught us about unfair labor practices and poverty-level wages suffered by the majority of food service workers in the U.S. And 2014's Reclaiming Prophetic Witness urges us to raise our liberal religious voices in the moral and ethical debates of our times, debates that are often dominated by conservative Christian voices. All of these books can be purchased through the UUA bookstore, and all of the discussion guides are available online at no cost at uua.org. Search UUA Common Read on that site. So today we consider Just Mercy, a beautifully written book by Bryan Stevenson, a gifted and dedicated attorney who founded the Equal Justice Initiative. The Equal Justice Initiative is a legal practice dedicated to defending the poor, the wrongly condemned, and those trapped in the furthest reaches of our criminal justice system, including children sentenced to life without parole, including the mentally challenged and the mentally ill, who often have harsh sentences imposed upon them. Stevenson's Just Mercy is not what I'd call a fun book. Would you agree?
I do agree.
But it is often spellbinding. Once you get started reading it, once you are appalled by what is happening to some of the most vulnerable people in our society, you may find it difficult to stop reading. My hope is that my reflection today will at the very least open your eyes to some of the things happening in our country in the name of justice. And even better, encourage you to make at least one commitment to learning or to taking action. Before I go any further, I want to make a few disclaimers and drop a few things. Excuse me. First, I am not an expert on our criminal justice system. I am learning the ins and outs of this system along with many of you. Secondly, much of what I am sharing with you today comes straight from Mr. Stevenson's book and the UUA study guide. And finally, I am still learning every single day how much I take my white privilege for granted. And I struggle every single day to take my blinders off and see things more clearly. About 2 weeks ago, I came one step closer to what I call my Medicare birthday. I shared that birth date with a nephew. He would have been 19 on October 28th if in early February, he hadn't become Rockford, Illinois' 6th homicide victim of the year. Jalen was the son of our niece, Cheryl, whose skin is white, and her husband, Jeff, who is African American. A handsome, athletic young man. Jalen had gotten in with the wrong crowd, and he was doing some things he probably shouldn't have been doing when he was shot in the head late on a cold winter's night and left to die by the side of the road. While there are known witnesses, it's been 9 months since the shooting, and Jalen's killer has still not been apprehended. The issues around this case are, of course, complex, but sometimes I just have to ask myself how much of the mystery of Jalen's death remains unsolved because he's just another young black man. Jalen's dad, Jeff, has been in and out of prison a few times on drug charges. Thankfully, he has not had to serve some of the ridiculously long sentences that you'll read about in this book. I'm not saying there wasn't some wrongdoing on Jeff's part, but the whole process has been very tough on the family, separating them for long periods of time and straining their ability to survive financially. Jeff was not even allowed to attend his son's funeral. And when he was released from jail several months later, he couldn't even return to his own home because there was a daycare facility within a few blocks. Ex-cons have a very hard time reintegrating into the work world and back into society in general. I've been on the fringes of these family stories, trying to provide some comfort from afar, some emotional support. My heart breaking and my husband's too, over the pain that our extended family must bear. But we haven't really done much besides grieve with them, offer emotional support, and recognize perhaps more than we once did our white privilege. The fact that we just happen to be born in an affluent country with white skin. Without earning or deserving it, we are afforded advantages and opportunities that we don't even have to think about and that we take for granted. I struggled with how to summarize the complexity of the issues and the impact of the stories told in Bryan Stevenson's Just Mercy. There's no way to do the book justice, pun intended, in just 20 or so minutes. I finally decided that Stevenson's words are both eloquent and powerful, so I am going to read parts of his introduction and briefly illustrate some of his points with snippets of the stories he tells, hopefully with just enough information to encourage you to read the whole book. Stevenson says his book is about getting closer to mass incarceration and extreme punishment in America. It is about how easily we condemn people in this country and the injustice we create when we allow fear, anger, and distance to shape the way we treat the most vulnerable among us. When Stephen first began visiting prisoners on death row in the early 1980s, he tells us that America was in the early stages of a radical transformation that would turn us into an unprecedentedly harsh and punitive nation. A transformation that would result in mass imprisonment that has no historical parallel. Today, our country has the highest rate of incarceration in the world. The prison population has increased from 300,000 people in the early 1970s to 2.3 million people today. There are nearly 6 million people on probation or parole. 1 in every 15 people born in the United States in 2001 is expected to go to jail or prison. 1 in every 3 black male babies born in this century is expected to be incarcerated. That is unacceptable. Stevenson continues, "We have shot, hanged, gassed, electrocuted, and lethally injected hundreds of people to carry out legally sanctioned executions. Thousands more await their execution on death row. Some states have no minimum age for prosecuting children as adults. We've sent 250,000 kids to adult jails and prisons to serve long prison terms, some under the age of 12. For years, we've been the only country in the world that condemns children to life imprisonment without parole. Nearly 3,000 juveniles have been sentenced to die in prison, to live out their life in prison and die there." Stevenson uses personal examples throughout his book to illustrate the extent of these sad points. Here's one short story about a boy named Charlie. Charlie was only 14 when he shot and killed his mother's boyfriend. After the boyfriend, George, came home in a drunken rage and knocked Charlie's mother unconscious. Charlie was a very small boy for his age. He was a good student. He tried and tried, but he could not revive his mom. He thought she was dead. Filled with panic and rage, Charlie shot George, who by then had passed out on the bed. Then Charlie heard his mother groan in the kitchen on the floor where she lay in a pool of blood. And he ran to call 911. Charlie, already traumatized, was arrested and taken to a small county jail for adults, where he was repeatedly gang raped before attorney Stevenson secured his transfer to a juvenile facility. True story. Here's another one. In 1990, Ian Manuel, 13 years old, was coerced by 2 older boys into helping with a robbery. Ian shot the targeted woman when she tried to resist. He pled guilty, hoping for leniency. Instead, at 13 years of age, he was sentenced to life without parole. Because he was so small and young, they actually had to cut a whole bunch of length off of the prison uniform for him to be able to fit into one. And they decided that they would keep him away from the adult prisoners. This was their solution. They put him in solitary confinement. He remained there for 18 years. This was not ultimately to protect him from the adult men, but to extend his punishment. Every time he hurt himself, he started cutting. Every time he attempted suicide or acted out, he was going crazy in solitary confinement. Who wouldn't? The woman Ian shot, she survived and she begged that the boy receive a reduced sentence, but her pleas were ignored. In addition to disturbing stories like these, Stevenson tells us that hundreds of thousands of non-violent offenders have been forced to spend decades in prison because we've created laws that make writing a bad check or committing a petty theft or minor property crime an offense that can result in life imprisonment. We have declared a costly war on people with substance abuse problems. There are more than 500,000 people in state or federal prisons for drug offenses today, up from just 41,000 in 1980. The collateral consequences of mass incarceration have been equally profound. We ban poor women and inevitably their children from receiving food stamps and public housing if they have prior drug convictions. We've created a new caste system that forces thousands of people into homelessness, bans them from living with their families and in their communities, and renders them virtually unemployable. This extensive and harsh criminalization of poverty, drug addiction, and mental illness has resulted in many tragic stories. Consider the story of Marcia, who was living with her husband and 5 children in a FEMA camper trailer following Hurricane Ivan. She couldn't afford prenatal care, so when she discovered that she was pregnant with her 6th child, she decided to do what she could to take care of her family and this pregnancy. She had some problems. She didn't know, but she had placental abruption. And she ended up delivering a stillborn child. And Marcia and her husband grieved over the loss of this child they had named Timothy. But they couldn't afford to bury Timothy. So they created a small grave outside their home, and they marked it with his name. A nosy neighbor and an unsubstantiated medical opinion without benefit of autopsy resulted in 10 years of wrongful imprisonment for Marcia because she was charged with murder. And her family struggled to survive without her all that time. There's no shortage of such stories. Stories like that of Trina, a child of poverty and abuse whose mental and physical health has steadily deteriorated during the 52 years of her imprisonment without chance for parole. And here was her crime. When she was 14, she and some friends were friends with a couple of boys. They really liked him. You know how teenagers are. They wanted to be with those boys. So they sneaked into the boys' house at night, and they were striking matches to try to find their way to the boys' bedroom. And in that effort, a fire was set, and 2 people died. It was accidental. We're asked to consider, too, the story of Herbert, a Vietnam vet suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder and other traumatic events of childhood. He inadvertently caused the death of a child while attempting to impress and win back a girlfriend. The stories go on and on. I won't depress you by telling you more of them. Those were tough enough ones. But you should know that the stories include many stories about people wrongfully convicted and even wrongfully executed. Where is the hope here? Where is the justice? Where is the mercy? Thankfully, Brian Stevenson shared some of those stories too. Stories about the saving power of human connection when imprisoned people are not forgotten, when they receive letters or visits, Stories about erroneous convictions overturned, death row inmates exonerated. He told the story of a hardcore racist prison guard who insisted on humiliating him. Stevenson is black, the guard was white, and the guard demanded a strip search before allowing Stevenson, an attorney, in to visit a client, a prisoner who was to be his client. Pretty terrible. But this same guard ended up softening, understanding, and appreciating the work that Stevenson was doing for prisoners, many who had been victims of bad foster parenting and many moves and much abuse, not unlike the guard himself. Stevenson reminds us that each of us is more than the worst thing we've ever done. Each of us is more than the worst thing we've ever done. And although Stevenson has been tempted to give up his work many times, he keeps at it because he has learned to recognize his own brokenness as well as the brokenness of our society. This recognition of brokenness allows him to see the very humanness and the more in every person he meets, prisoner or not. Stevenson has a kind of hope that Václav Havel called an orientation of the spirit. Stevenson says that's the kind of hope that creates a willingness to position oneself in a hopeless place and be a witness. It's the kind of hope that allows one to believe in a better future, even in the face of abusive power. That kind of hope makes one strong. Stevenson's book asks us to learn, to become witnesses, to nurture that kind of hope. For when we recognize that all of us have been hurt, that all of us are broken in some ways, then we can learn to look beyond the inflammatory labels that our media likes to throw out in front of us: rapist, murderer, sex offender, felon. We can see other human beings that are caught up in complex layers of fear and prejudice. And we discover that this web of hurt and brokenness in which we live, it's also a web of healing and mercy, and it is rife with possibilities for reconciliation. Can we promote healing, mercy, reconciliation? Will we close our ears, shut our eyes to the voices of the voiceless? Will we block out information about those who are victims of the many injustices of our laws, our system of punishments? Or will we open our eyes and ears to those most at risk in this system? Sharon Welch is a well-known Unitarian Universalist ethicist and theologian currently on faculty of my alma mater, Meadville Lombard Theological School. She bets that we are apt to turn away. This is a tough subject. In the study guide that accompanies Just Mercy, Welch states that people who are comfortable often turn away from the day-to-day issues of oppression because solutions to complex social problems are not within easy reach. Here's what she writes. It is easier to give up on long-term social change when one is comfortable in the present, when it is possible to have challenging work, excellent health care and housing, and access to fine arts. When the good life is present or within reach, it is tempting to despair of it ever being in reach for others. Tempting to resort merely to enjoying the good life for oneself and one's family. Now, I am not going to assume that everyone here lives the good life and is totally comfortable in the present in all the ways that Sharon Welch described. But I am going to remind you of a poem I learned when I was a little girl, one found in our gray hymnals. It's by Edward Everett Hale. It starts out, I am only one. And if you know it, please say it with me. I am only one. But still, I am one. I cannot do everything, but still I can do something. And because I cannot do everything, I will not refuse to do the something that I can do. What is the something you can do? I want to give you just a few ideas from the UUA study guide. First of all, read Brian Stevenson's book, Just Mercy. Share it with your family and friends. Share it with your book group. Use it as a adult faith development program here. You can get the study guide. Invite people over to watch Brian Stevenson's TED Talk and have a conversation about your reactions to it. Visit the website for Stevenson's Equal Justice Initiative. It has a lot of resources and relevant topics on things like lynchings in America, the incarceration of children, and racial discrimination by jury selection. He talks quite a bit about that in this book, and it's appalling. Take a look at the 2005 UUA Statement of Conscience entitled Criminal Justice and Prison Reform. You can find that on the UUA website under Statements of Conscience. And there's a whole list of things there, whole list of ideas of things you can do as one person or as a group. Learn about the Unitarian Universalist Church of the Larger Fellowship's prison ministry. The CLF, as we call the Church of the Larger Fellowship, can help you take part in their efforts to reach out to those who are incarcerated, perhaps just by being a pen pal. These are just a few of the ideas listed in the study guide that goes along with Just Mercy. Is there at least one thing you think you might be able to do on that list? I hope so. Do you remember the story in the New Testament book of John where Jesus advocates for mercy for a condemned woman? And he says, "Let anyone among you who is without sin be the first to cast the stone." That's how they dealt with problems or crimes. They stoned people. But in that story, after Jesus said, "Let the person who is without sin cast a stone," all of the would-be stone throwers retreated. And Jesus is said to have forgiven the woman and urged her to sin no more. It seems that today, self-righteousness, fear, and anger have caused many stones to be hurled at people, even people that have already fallen down, even when we know we should forgive or show compassion. And Stevenson says we just cannot stand by and let this happen. We may not be the ones hurling the stones, but we can try to catch some of them. He urges us to be stone catchers, to find ways to help connect with and protect the most vulnerable among us. I hope that we can prove Sharon Welch wrong. I hope that we're not so comfortable we will walk away today and not think about this message or think about what we might do. I hope that we can be stone catchers. So let us close this reflection with the words of former UUA President William Sinkford, found in a little meditation manual called Voices from the Margins. The title is Only Begun. And I invite you into the spirit of prayer, meditation, reflection. Spirit of life and love, Dear God of all nations, there is so much work to do. We have only begun to imagine justice and mercy. Help us hold fast to our vision of what can be. May we seek the hope in our history and find the courage and the voice to work for that constant rebirth of freedom and justice. That is our dream. Amen.